Sarah, so a couple things I wanted to just jump off and talk and start the conversation about. And first is in April, and we're recording this the last day in April, but in April, a couple things that have happened, and there's been a lot of conversation about it, but I haven't heard your take on it. One is the notice of proposed rulemaking about the AML program rule. So I want to get your take on some of the things there. Couple of other reports have come out. Obviously, IRS continues to provide really good stats on things that they're doing. And then FinCEN issued their annual report, and there were some items in there. And also, we talked about this right before we started to record. One of the subcommittees, the House Financial Services Committee, is going to have a hearing on May the 19th on BSA reform. So don't know the witness list yet. The scope is seemingly that broad, so it's all about how do you modernize BSA, which you've all been talking about for quite a long period of time. So I'd just like to get your initial thoughts about some of the things that maybe we haven't talked about, either weren't in the program rule, haven't been part of any legislation. Obviously some of the stuff can be mollified by policy. Others would need regulation. Some would need guidance. But I'm obviously respect your thoughts on that. So we'll go with that. So let's start off with the program rule. It was posted, I believe, on April 6th. There's a 60-day comment period. As I mentioned to you before we recorded, I've sat down with Dan Stefano from Davis Polk, got his take. Then he and I and Rick Small had a conversation earlier this week that we'll be posting. And so sort of, I won't say got mixed messages from both of them, but on the one hand, Dan was still questioning whether or not how transformative this is going to be. And Rick was saying he's sort of on the fence about that. He saw some things that he thought were valuable, but he also saw some things that seemingly echoed the last program rule proposal. So we could start anywhere you'd like, but just in general, what was your first overall take? And then let's talk about some of the specifics. Again, the caveat is it's a rulemaking process, so some of these things could change based on the comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think my first impression of it was, wow, that's a lot of words. And then I saw Laurel Loomis, who posted that, and she's like, my first blush on this was that could have been said with less words. And I thought that's exactly what went through my mind, was like, did we really need all these words? So I think that was the first one when I got through it, which it did take me a couple days to actually read the whole thing, 200 and some pages. But I think the thing that left me kind of like still unsure and wanting more is like they kind of use these three different words on repeat a lot without ever actually putting any meat to them. And that was risk-based, effectiveness, and reasonably designed. Those came up like over and over, multiple dozens and dozens of times. And so when because I like things that are defined. I know I talk a lot about like we need to define fintechs and all this kind of stuff. I like definitions. I feel like without definitions, you can read through that document and you still don't know what to do with it because nobody defined what does effectiveness look like for a board, for the AML officer, for an FIU, for a bank regulator. Effectiveness has to be defined. It has to be corralled and fleshed out. And I felt like they didn't do that. I think, a couple of their questions, they kind of ask people to comment on what, effectiveness would look like, which kind of took me back to, 6 years ago when they had the NPRM on effectiveness.
Right.
So I think they're still struggling with that. And I think part of that is because they need more practitioners involved in this. And that's where I really want people to understand, even if you don't have the bandwidth to answer all, 75 questions. I forget how many questions they have, but they had a ton. Pick one or two that would really move the ball down the field for you as a practitioner and answer that one. You don't have to answer all of them. You can pick and choose the questions that you want to actually contribute to. So, there were a couple things where I was like, all right, what does effectiveness mean? You got to corral this for me. And then, reasonably designed, I think is also left up to interpretation. Then, of course, the risk-based approach, which I know a lot of people use this and it bothers me. It's like their get out of jail free card and they throw it around. They say, oh, well, that's my risk-based approach. And nobody actually does any of the work behind the risk-based approach to defend what their risk-based approach actually looks like. They don't look at threats. They don't look at vulnerabilities. They just say, that's my risk-based approach. And that's where I felt like when I kept reading it and I kept seeing, oh, it has to be a risk-based approach to XYZ. Again, I'm like, define risk-based approach. Like, give me some things to do to develop a risk-based approach. It's not a result of the risk assessment process, which they also asked about. So, those are my first kind of things. I got to the end and I felt like I had gotten to the middle of a mystery and then they stopped writing the book. Right.
So a couple of things I want to follow up on, though. One is now there'll be a mandated risk assessment, which if you were a bank and didn't do one in the past, that was more than problematic, obviously. So that's part of it. And what I think is the major change, at least for all of us that are practitioners, is that, my words, FinCEN will have at least a 30-day opportunity on an enforcement action or a major formal criticism by the federal banking agencies to weigh in. It didn't say a final approval, it said collaboration, but clearly that's going to extend the clock, if you will. And since you've obviously worked with banks that have had enforcement actions and others, besides having to address several agencies, the banking agency and FinCEN, from a practical and certainly you can mention anything you want to do about risk assessment. I don't want to forget that. But what does that do you think, to the infrastructure and the process going forward? Knowing also, again, not trying to prejudice your answer, that FinCEN doesn't have extensive resources. So that I think is going to be a challenge. But what do you take from that part of the rule?
I see it as another bottleneck in a process that's already has so many bottlenecks to it. I mean, working with banks when they first get, their first sniff of like, hey, this is going to turn into something formal. You're going to have to, it may be an MRA, it may be all the way to an order. That process takes a long time and banks are stuck like, okay, well, when can I start this process of fixing everything? And it can be 6, 12, 18 months because of all the other bottlenecks, depending on the level that it reaches. So now we're going to add another layer of approval potentially to this. And I don't know if it actually helps to reform it. I feel like I felt like what they were trying to get at was something that I've long lobbied for, which is like an OIG-esque is what I call it, like an OIG function that sits within FinCEN.
Right.
And monitors all of the federal banking agencies to make sure that they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing from what FinCEN requires of them. That's what I have thought. And then when they wrote this, I thought, well, I guess that's kind of a wonky, weird way of trying to ensure, because I mean, if you read all the language around it, they're talking about they want to ensure consistency.
Right.
And that's why they're going to now have all of these things coming to FinCEN. And I'm like, we could have ensured consistency in another way by having somebody who sits in FinCEN, who looks at all the agencies, says, hey, you agency, which I will not name, you don't have any consent orders and you haven't for 6 years and no, barely any MRA type things. And then this other agency is churning them out like it's going out of business. Right. That I think is what they were going for. So that would be what I would hope to see, not to have another bottleneck in a process that's already very frustrating for financial institutions.
Yeah, and I'm also talking to several former regulators. They have speculated that their former colleagues who are currently in role could find ways to still provide the formal criticisms, but do it sort of outside of the BSA process to circumvent, my words, not theirs, but to, basically avoid the bottleneck. So that's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, I think it's designed, in my view, part of it's political, right? I think it's designed to lessen the amount of enforcement actions without really addressing whether or not things are consistent or subjective. All those things are issues, and we've debated them for years. but I fear that this is simply designed as a way to either slow walk or eliminate enforcement actions. And let's face it, no one wants our industry to get enforcement actions, but when they are earned because of the failures, that needs to happen so that the rest of us can learn from those things. So that's going to be interesting to do. Now, we also, when I talked to Dan and Rick and others, this process is going to take a while. 60-day comment period. Will the reg even be out by the end of 26? Will it be effective in 27, 20? So this may be a couple of years until it actually occurs. And then, also the training part of it for the federal banking agencies. How is that? Do you redo the manual, the FFIC, like all those sort of things? I don't think have been. I
Yeah.
doubt they've been thought through very carefully because it's going to take a while, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that manual has grown since
Right.
2005, and it hasn't really gotten any more clear or any more operational in nature. It's just become more wordy. So I'm hoping that this takes a long time, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Should we have some more debate? Now, the
Yeah.
reason I am paying attention to everything, but I was looking to see if I could pull up the annual report that I wanted to get your take on. It's not that simple to find it on the. I mean, I saw it already and
It's
read
not.
it on the
Yeah.
FinCEN website, so that was a little strange. But so we don't have to
Yeah.
go through it in
Yeah.
specifics. But was there anything in the annual report that you want to flag or highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think, going through there, I'm certainly a supporter of what FinCEN does, right? And I've said this before with you that like
Yeah.
they are severely understaffed, and so I
Right.
think they do a great job with the resources that they have. Do we all want different things from our FIU? Of course, but I think overall, they're trying to do the best that they can with what they have.
Right.
And I feel like these reports are good, but it's also a reminder of some of the issues that still plague us and some of the issues that they're trying to address in the reform. Like when they go through and they give us the SAR stats, like our SAR form is not aligned with our national priorities, not even close. They have suspicious activity types that are like intermingled with the way in which somebody carries out a suspicious activity, which makes the use of those SARs on the agent's side a lot harder.
Right.
They have, this other suspicious activity box or this section that like was the number one. I think it was like 3.2 or 3.1 million SARs that had other suspicious activity. And then within that is like human trafficking, human smuggling, multiple people. I'm like, multiple people is not that's a contextual piece of data
Right.
to the suspicious activity, but that's not necessarily the suspicious activity. So, so there's just ways in which I feel like that information that they put out is good, and it's a good reminder, and it's good for the producers of SARs and CTRs to know IRS CI and the Bureau that they're using it. But at the end of the day, I'm left like, we need to fix our SAR forms, and we need to make our CTR process better and more efficient. And that is not the same thing as raising the thresholds, which we've talked about before. So, so I just kind of got to the end of that, and I was like, well, that's good. I'm glad that they have this information, and I know they tried to make the best sense out of it. But like looking at somebody who, looking at that data when FinCEN does their SAR numbers, and I go and I get all the data and I try to work with it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is insane. And it doesn't have to be like that. No, like no other FIU has these problems when it comes to their SARs and STR forms. So I feel like we need to start there.
Yeah, if you remember, for the longest time, law enforcement complained that when they accessed the SARs and at that time actually printed them out, it would be like a page of a run-on sentence that it was hard to distinguish because of whatever software they were using. And that was
Yeah.
for a long time. I
Yeah.
think they've addressed that, but and I'm not. I have no idea where they got this from, but but how much money they said they've saved in terms of regulatory burden with a lot of this stuff that hasn't changed it. I don't know how you do that. So I agree with you that stats on SAR filings. Heck, I mean, way back when I was working with the banking industry directly, the SAR activity review I thought was an excellent publication for what it was at the time, which would give you statistics, but also give you a couple of examples that they would call out in the document, and there would also be a section in it. Here's issues with check fraud. Here's issues with cyber. And they have technical bulletins now, but it's not the same. And I think that was a sort of a basic newsletter, if you will, came out quarterly, but I thought it was pretty valuable. I'm not sure this annual report gives you that, but anytime you're getting data, it's something to react to. So keep, we want them to keep going. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we definitely don't want them to stop. But yes, I would love for them to go back and keep churning out those. They were called what? The TTIs at the end. Trends, tips, and information or something. Remember, is that what they?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I went before they redid their site. I went and I downloaded all of them. This was several years ago because I love finding just nuggets from like 20 years ago in there. Right. So yes.
Yeah, I was the coach. I was the co-chair of it at the time, as you saw. So yes.
Yeah.
That's. But anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so that the review, the program rule. I know before we recorded, you mentioned in your Dirty Money Weekly the issue with the PACE Act. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely don't have as strong of opinions as I do on other things for the PACE Act because I'm it's pretty early. Just introduced by 2 California representatives. I don't know, if it's going to get buried because it, to me, it looks like an end run around the Fed.
Yeah, describe what it's supposed to do. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's supposed to give an easier path for uninsured state chartered banks and money service businesses that have 40 or more MTL licenses. It's supposed to give them an easier path to get a pared down master account. I don't think it's the same thing as the skinny account that everyone talks about because they never used that, but it's some type of a pared down master account access to the Fed. And as somebody who has a de novo state chartered uninsured bank in Vermont and who has lived the tier 3 process, I will say that I'm not, I'm kind of split feelings on it. I don't know if I love the idea of giving large money service businesses, whether they're crypto or digital assets or fiat, direct access to the Fed. I don't know if I love that. But I do love the hopefulness because what this does is it takes them from like a tier 3, which is an uninsured state charter, no federal regulator, to a tier 2, which is a federal regulator because it puts them under the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. So that automatically upgrades them, if you will, to tier 2, which I guess is the equivalent of Comfort Plus on Delta. I'm not sure. It's not exactly first class, but so I'm kind of waiting. I'm kind of split on this because of the tier 3. Because there's a ton, and I did put some stats in there about how many tier 3s are still out there, and then there's like been 2 or 3 tier 2s. That's it for like the last 5 or 6 years, or 4 or 5 years that I looked at the numbers, and then there's like 30 plus that are stuck in the tier 3. So I don't know if this is their way of kind of doing an end run around the Fed's processes or what, but it'll be interesting to watch and see what happens.
Yeah, and that's what you're able to do with your newsletter is give folks, hey, here are some things that are coming down the pike. Look, watch them, see what happens there.
Yeah.
I also wanted to give you a chance. You wanted to talk a little bit about model validation. Obviously, that's a key topic for not just for AML officers, but for compliance professionals. Talk a bit about the challenges you see there.
I mean, I think when I read that, I was very happy, to be honest with you.
And read what? You read what?
Oh, sorry. When I read that all the federal banking agencies had updated and basically removed the requirement to do a model validation under the OCC rules because they
Right.
were linking back to the old Basel rules, Basel capital risk model rules. And I have fought this for a long time. Like I have long, like, had healthy debates with regulators about like, don't put an old capital model, like a validation review on something as nuanced as money laundering. Like that,
Right.
it doesn't fit. It is definitely square peg, round hole. And so when I saw this, I was happy, but if I think before financial institutions go, oh, good, one thing I can take off my budget, I think the thing that they have to keep their eye on the prize, our job is to find suspicious activity, report it in a timely manner to our law enforcement partners, right? I say this all the time. I should get it just tattooed on my forehead. That is our main goal. So if that's our main goal, how do we go about that? Well, we have to make sure that our systems that we're safely relying on are tailored to the threats that are in our institution. And that really is at the heart, and that should have been at the heart of the validation requirement, but it wasn't. It was never designed like that. So I think before people start taking it off their budget for 2027 and beyond, that they look at it and go, I've never filed a SAR for human trafficking and I'm in a major metropolitan city. I've never filed a SAR for drug trafficking and, all of my branches are around all these interstates. Right? Those are the kind of things that they should be paying attention to go, maybe I do need a validation, but I need the validation to be tailored to the threats within my institution, not just this, what I call the statistical gymnastics exercise, right? This, which you can tell anything you want with stats. So I was happy to see it, but I think it comes with a, measure of caution.
As we close down this month's conversation, as we said, there's a hearing on May 19th on BSA reform or modernization, if you will, something that obviously AMLA tried to address, the program rule tries to address. You could argue some of the legislation that's going through Congress tries to address. I think that's more of a debate, but it's certainly that's part of the reason for it. So if you're testifying on the 19th, or providing information to the committee, what are some of the things that you and your colleagues, because both of us talked to a lot of people, let's say what are three items if you really want to modernize BSA? Here's three things that we would do. Now maybe there's 10, but let's encapsulate it that way. What would be in your top three?
My top three would probably be first, identifying effectiveness. I feel like we can't do anything of substance unless we're all on the same page with what we're measuring ourselves against. And so I think effectiveness has to be defined. And I don't think it needs to be a formal definition like what we've seen from all these different, FATF, Wolfsburg. Love them, but not operational. We need an operational definition, just kind of a box, right? This is for regulators. This is for practitioners. These are for traditional financial institutions. This is for money service businesses. This is for fintechs. I think we all need different types of effectiveness indicators. That's what I call them. They can call them whatever they want. Green lights of effectiveness. I don't care. But we need to put meat on that first. And I think once we go through that exercise, what comes out of that are a lot of other things that are tied to all of the other things they talk about, but they don't actually define what effectiveness looks like. So I think that would be the first one. I think the second one would be, they had a question in there about risk assessment processes versus risk assessment process. And I think they were pointing to like the risk-based approach. So I think defining, like, if they're going to make a requirement for a risk assessment process, or processes, I don't care if it's singular or plural, they should copy what Treasury does already, which is threats plus vulnerabilities equals risk. That's their own definition that they use in our national money laundering risk assessments.
Right.
Why are we not taking that? Because that's brilliant. And the exercise that forces financial institutions to go through is a game changer. And because you have to look under that rock, you cannot say, "Oh, I don't have risks of proliferation financing." No, you have to look under that rock. You have to make sure that you aren't banking a manufacturer that manufactures refrigerator coils and they're also sending it elsewhere, right? So I think that would probably be my second one. Like, let's have a real discussion about what a risk-based approach looks like, and let's stop using that term unless we actually define it. Probably the third one would be the SAR form. I think once we get through those two things, we will have a beautiful product, but it's not going to help the agents if we aren't able to get it into a readable, digestible report for them. So those would be my three things.
Those are great. I've often thought about creating something that we did after 9/11. We had the 9/11 Commission to actually have a BSA modernization commission with all the stakeholders. The BSA advisory group, that's not going to cut it. Having been part of that, it's fine, but I don't think that's the vehicle. I think you need, and it's hard to do in these chaotic times to have anything bipartisan. I'm not even talking politically. I think you have to have MSBs and fintechs at the table, obviously. You need the crypto world there. You need realists. You need everybody that should be, even if they're not currently covered under the BSA, part of that conversation. And you need law enforcement there with bells on. I mean, because that's why we do this, as you just said. I mean, it's because we need to get the information to law enforcement. So they need to be part of this, and then the regulators obviously have to be in there because they're going to oversee everything and give them a time frame and come out with something. Back in the early '80s, there was something called the I think it was the Organized Crime Commission, and out of that study in 1984, the commission was formed. I believe the report was either issued then or the next year. The 1986 Money Laundering Control Act came out of that. So 40 years ago, we had the passage of the Control Act, and that was in response to the organized. It was called I know part of the typologies include something called the Pizza Connection because it was about mafia issues in Boston. But it was the organ, and you could still find the report. But that report didn't have just AML issues because it wasn't even called AML then. But it was about how to address the explosion of drug trafficking and other issues. So doing something similar, I think, would make a ton of sense. So we'll see if anybody takes that up and runs with it.
Yeah. No, I like that idea. Yeah. So May 19th, right, is the
Yeah, May 19th. Let's say change it. It is listed on their website, so we'll get more then. And then in May, when we chat again, we can talk about your take about the hearing and any other issues. Sarah, thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it. Stay safe. We'll see you next month.
All right. Thanks so much.